Wonderful. Welcome, a very warm welcome to you all once again. My name is Rose Gottemoeller. I'm the William J. Perry Lecturer here at the Center for International Security and Cooperation of Stanford University, and we're under the aegis of the Freeman Spogli Institute. Many of you are associated with one or the other or both of them. I'm also a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. Again, many colleagues around the room, so thank you very much for coming today. We have a superlative group here to talk about the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and its goals and objectives for the future. We are 89 seconds to midnight. What does that mean? And what does it mean for the future of weapons of mass destruction, for the future of our planet's climate, and for so many other issues that could be an existential risk to humanity? So, as I said, we have a star power panel here today. I'm delighted. I'm not going to read everybody's bio at length. You know about these individuals and can find out more about them online, but I'm so honored to welcome here today Edmund G. Jerry Brown. We all know him as Governor Jerry Brown, who served 4 terms as governor of California, the 34th and 39th governor of California, from 1975 to 1983, and from 2011 to 2019. Governor Brown is the executive chair of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists and plays an enormous intellectual leadership role for the board and also for the Bulletin itself. And so we're so pleased and honored that he is here today. He's mentioned many, many times to me how his education has formed him, including his years at the Jesuit Seminary in Los Gatos, California. So, Governor, if you care to reflect from the highest level of reflection down to the lowest, we'll be very happy to hear you. But I speak so, I think, sparsely about a career that has spanned much public service here in California, but also, again, great intellectual service to humanity in thinking about the issues to do with nuclear threats around the world. Next, and to my right, is Dr. Herbert Lin. He is on the board, the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. These are the clock guys. These are the guys who really make those decisions about how close the Doomsday Clock will move to midnight. Dr. Lin is a senior research scholar for cyber policy and security at the Center for International Security and Cooperation. He's a colleague of mine here at CSAC, and also a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. So he has quite a bit to do with work here at Stanford these days, but he has made his career looking at policy-related dimensions of cybersecurity and cyberspace. He's particularly interested in the use of offensive operations in cyberspace as instruments of national policy. So Herb knows everything about cyber threats, cybersecurity, cyber defense, and thinks a lot about them in the context of weapons of mass destruction threats. And finally, and it's last but by no means least, we are welcoming today the new CEO of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Alexandra Bell, who just succeeded Rachel Bronson in February of this year. Rachel had been in that role for a decade or more and had served in a superlative way, but I'm very delighted that Alex has taken over this role. She is a nuclear policy expert extraordinaire with long experience both in the non-governmental sector, in the civil sector, but also working in government. In fact, she and I worked very closely together when I was in government during the period of the Obama administration. But her most recent government experience was a leadership role in the Department of State as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Nuclear Affairs in the Bureau of Arms Control, Deterrence, and Stability. So I'm very pleased to welcome Alex to this setting today because it's a great opportunity for you to hear from her about her goals and objectives for the Bulletin, and also to get your ideas coming her way as well. A back and forth dialogue will be, I think, very useful for us all. So my first order of business is to turn to you, Governor Brown, for 10 minutes or so, how you're thinking about the big risks that are facing us today and how you think that we should confront them. And then we'll go in order down the line. But sir, over to you.
Well, that's a pretty big order. how are we thinking about these big questions? The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists is about the atomic threat. It's added other things in recent years like climate and bio and disruptive technologies. But this whole matter of the bomb and what it means for humanity and how we're handling it, it's got a long history. The great question that people have asked, how come we haven't had a nuclear exchange, nuclear bomb go off, a nuclear missile since Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Nobody really knows. Some people will say it's deterrence. Other people say it's luck. It's probably a little of both and things that we can't fully understand. But we know it's profoundly dangerous. And these weapons are still around, far less than they used to be. We used to have something like 70,000 weapons in the world. Now we're down to 13,000 or thereabouts. So in one sense, that's progress. But given what nuclear weapons are, the danger is still totally catastrophic, or the word's been used in more recent years, existential. So thinking about that is thinking about the unthinkable, as I think Herman Kahn once phrased it, is profoundly important. And I don't think many people want to think about it. I've had the occasion, because of my connection with the Bulletin, to talk about this topic. And I would say most of the people that I talk with don't want to talk about it, don't want to hear about it. It's just unpleasant because it's hard to know what can you do about it as an individual, and probably not very much, depending upon where you are. It's still profoundly important to think through what our policies are, where we are, where we're going. And it's also entwined in politics. So I'm involved in this topic, not as a scientist. As a matter of fact, I got a D in physics in high school at St. Ignatius High School in 1954. So, no, that was, actually it was 1953 when I was a junior. But this business of nuclear exchange, it's also about people, about how people see things, how the politicians think. If we're going to have a nuclear war, it's probably going to be declared by the politicians. It'll be somebody who's in office, elected or maybe not elected, depending on who starts it. So a human perception is really important. How do you understand all this stuff? So there's all the technical issues about the weapon systems and the throw weights and the consequences, and it's myriad. But at the end of the day, it's human beings that are controlling it. And what I think is really important to realize is these systems are not totally error-free. There's flaws. Bill Perry talked in his book, My Journey at the Brink, of nuclear blunder, mistake. And he said the thinking in decades before this more recent period has been the bolt out of the blue. What can we do to stop Russia from sending weapons our way? And yet, more immediately, more realistically, the problem is a mistake, a miscalculation, or an error in the system. And when I think about these, all the nuclear warheads on all the missiles and submarines and airplanes and storage facilities, all connected mechanically and also through various types of complex software, and then handled by how many? 1,000 people? 10,000 people? There's a lot of fallible human beings embedded in a lot of software and hardware with a lot of fear in all of their minds. And the key to deterrence is threat. If you do that, I'll do this. So it's essentially a threat. And threats don't create tranquility or confidence. Threats create anxiety. Fear breeds fear. And fear does not go away unless there's some reason to fear less. And yet the whole point of deterrence is to scare more, to threaten more. That's what it's all about. Modernization. You got to make sure they work. And you add new weapon systems. Then the Russians add systems. Then the Chinese and all the other nuclear powers. So we're really in a muddle here. We're in a mess because it's very hard to untangle because the system is built on threats, and threats aren't secure unless they're continuously renewed and in some ways expanded, escalated, modified, innovated. And that's really what we're doing. So one way to look at it is we have to manage this very dangerous game. And we have to manage threats of the technology that we're constantly improving. And yet, we have to really examine that fundamental premise. And that would take understanding and agreement and dialogue. That's why we got to start talking to the Russians about missiles, nuclear, and the same with the Chinese. Now, some of the time they don't want to talk to us. Some of the times we didn't talk to them. I mean, when that balloon came over, that stopped conversation for a couple of years. And we need to engage the nuclear powers, particularly Russia, but also China. And it isn't that easy because we can look at Putin and his evil, and then he'll look at us, and who knows what he's thinking, but it's not positive. In the midst of this very discordant set of relationships, we have to find some common ground. The common ground are the facts. You know, what do we have here? What have we created with the nuclear technology, the missile technology, and the software, all the things we have that go into the nuclear competition? And just that reality ought to be enough to slow people down. It has been in the past. When you think about the Nixon and Brezhnev and other agreements that we've had, even and most recently New START. So it is possible to get an understanding if you can get through. But how do you get understanding with someone you don't like, or even you hate, or you think are totally evil? Somehow you got to deal with what you think is evil. And the other side, whatever they think, they may think we're evil. They're evil to whatever their particular view of the world is. So the dialogue, the encounter with other people. I don't think things were going well with Biden, in my opinion. So we need to talk to the Russians. And now we got Trump, and he's talking to them, but I don't feel comfortable about Trump either. So we're on one side, and then we go to the other. And somehow we need clarity, clarity about our situation and concrete steps that could minimize the threat. And at the end of the day, I think if you think about an arms race, how does an arms race end? Because the last one we thought we'd ended it or slowed it down, and it appears to be starting up again. And at some point, you have to have trust. You have to find a way to trust. Reagan talks about trust but verify. However you put it, there has to be some basis by which we can feel that when we talk to the other side, there's something to talk about. And then whatever our verification processes are, we can rely on it. So that's, I think, is the most fundamental. We have to find a basis of trust with people that we fundamentally don't trust. So there's a technical part to it, there's a political part to it, but there's a deeply human part. And that human part is what's got to be emphasized. I hope, well, I almost said I'd hope and pray, but I haven't been doing much praying since I left Los Gatos in 1960. But I don't know what else to do because we're in a very difficult position because the space for what is allowed in Washington is very small, and the space for attention is very small. And yet these weapons, they don't get more benign. They're a horror that carries with them the promise of utter doom and apocalypse. And given that, we should be reacting in a way that we have not been reacting for many, many years. So my point is, there's no way out except to sit and talk as best we can with the other side, no matter what we think of. And we haven't been doing that. And then when we talk, we have to have the technical understanding to make real progress. Because we're not going to do a big sweep, we're going to make small steps forward. And I think they can be made. Rose knows what that's all about, and that's good to get going. but we're not there yet. And so I would say the prospect of doom is real. That's why we say 89 seconds to midnight. And these are not, we may be wrong at the Bulletin. I sat around and listened to the deliberations. These are serious, sincere people, and they're making their best judgment. And every year they get a little closer to doomsday, 12 o'clock. And so that ought to be enough. That ought to be a warning that we're not on the right path yet. We have to make a shift. And if we don't make that shift, we're going to keep moving in the direction, I would say the clock's going to keep moving. And who knows, maybe the years that we haven't had one, it has been luck. And the luck, as Bill Perry has said, runs out.
Thank you very much, Governor. Those are very sobering comments, and I think we'll pick up on many of them during our discussion. But let me turn to you next, Herb. And how are you thinking about these problems, particularly wrapped as you are in all these issues to do with new technologies, some not so new technologies, but technologies that continue to evolve rapidly in new directions? And the cyber realm is one that you're particularly familiar with. But how do you pick up on these comments?
Well, as the governor was speaking, I was recalling a story about Eisenhower in the late 50s, when he was presented by his military chiefs with a proposal for making 400 nuclear weapons. And his reaction to that was, 400 nuclear weapons? Why don't we just go crazy and build 10,000 of them?
Yeah.
Story reported by George Kistiakowsky, who was his science advisor. Technology has come a long way since then, but the risks of accident have never gone away. You talked about new technologies, and yet there were cyber problems with early warning systems that falsely signaled an attack that were, that happened even in the 60s. The question that you've asked about, with the advance of new technologies and so on, and the increasing computerization of lots and lots of things, and more computers replacing people in different functions and so on, we're putting more and more trust in our machines to do things that people used to do. Now, there's a good reason for a lot of that. Machines can do boring tasks repeatedly that people can't do so well on. On the other hand, people have the ability to exercise judgment, and it's not clear that we can get machines to exercise that same kind of judgment. And so it's a real worry with the increasing number of computers and machines that we don't really understand very well. We don't understand how they work. All of us use a cell phone or computers and so on. We've all had the experience of calling up the help desk and saying, I have a problem. And what they say to you is, they don't tell you how to fix it. What they do is they tell you, let's try X. And then if that doesn't work, we'll try Y. If Y doesn't work, we'll try Z. And if Z doesn't work, we'll try it. Those aren't statements of understanding or knowledge. They're statements of hope, right? They're hoping that these things will work. And that's what's happening with computers now. And you think it's bad with the computers you have now? Wait until you ask those questions of an AI system. Okay, you don't understand how AI works either to come to its answers. So I fear that this question that the governor raises, about which Bill Perry talks about too, about blundering. So a blunder could be caused by a computer error, by some output that you don't understand, that a person misinterprets, or mistaken conclusion or something, and that's what can set us off. So I think we're in increasing danger with more and more computer stuff interacting with our nuclear weapons.
You want to say just a word, because you are on the board that debated and discussed the move to 89 seconds this year. Do you want to just take a minute and talk about, I know that debate is strictly confidential, but the contours of debate in terms of how the members of the board were thinking about the threat environment going forward?
Sure. Well, the mechanics of the process are that we go on is that we go around the table with two questions. The first is, should the clock be moved? And if the answer is answered in the affirmative, then we have to decide, which direction and by how much. Okay, and so most people decided, there was a consensus that the clock ought to be moved forward, that is closer to midnight. And then the question is how much. Okay, well, we were set by the facts at the time were the clock was set at 90 seconds. And 2 years earlier, we had moved the clock from 100 seconds to 90 seconds. That was in 2022. So that was a movement of 10 seconds. That was prompted by the invasion of Ukraine. Okay? The actual physical invasion of a sovereign state by another sovereign state, and the attacker had nuclear weapons. So we moved it in 10 seconds in recognition that that was a really big deal. And it was, of course, backed up by nuclear threats. Then we said, well, if we're going to move the clock forward, well, we can't move it 10 seconds forward. I mean, because nothing has happened in the last year that's comparable to that. So, the number has to be smaller than 10, and it can't be just a little bit smaller. And 9 seconds doesn't make any sense. So it's going to be a small number, okay? And, can you 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds? We settled on 1 second to say that we're going in the wrong direction. And the crux of the matter was, it was the 1 second was the smallest increment that we could make to say the direction of things is bad. And we thought we shouldn't be focusing on the magnitude. We try, all of our announcements and so on, we focused on the direction. And at 89 seconds, it is the closest to midnight it's ever been, and therefore the implication of that is the most dangerous that it's ever been. So that was the consensus.
I was sitting in those meetings as well. I think the important point that it's not whether it's this second or 89 or 90 or 2 minutes. This is a very inexact art, but it's the fact that the whole group was about 20 individuals, 20 men and women, very thoughtful, very educated, have been thinking about this topic mostly for years. Think we're in a very dangerous situation. The 89 seconds is saying doom is nigh. We're close. Most of the time, most people don't think that. If you pick up the paper today, you're not thinking that somehow there's going to be a nuclear holocaust. It seems completely improbable. Yet people who spend their time trying to say, how dangerous is it? They're saying it's pretty dangerous. Now, hopefully, Herb and me and all the rest of them don't know what the hell they're talking about. I hope it isn't. But they seem to be pretty level-headed people, and what they're saying should scare the hell out of you. Unfortunately, it doesn't scare the hell out of most of the people in Washington. They live with this. And it kind of reminds me, when I was first campaigning for governor, 1974, I visited a tuna factory in San Pedro. And I walked through it. Boy, it stinks. I asked somebody, how do they stand this? And they said, they don't even know.
No.
They don't smell it anymore, because that's what they do. They cut up fish. Well, in Washington, they're cutting up a lot of stuff, and the odor, the odor is not bothering them, unfortunately. So be concerned.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you. Now, Alex, you were not yet in your new CEO position, so you did not actually take part in this debate, but you and I have stood outside it for many years, having worked in government positions. As you come into this important new leadership role, how are you thinking about that clock, and how are you thinking about the direction of travel for the Bulletin overall?
Thanks, Rose, and thanks for having me here at Stanford. I am a Carolina grad, go Tar Heels, but I do have a little bit of a Stanford connection. My great-great-grandfather married Leland Stanford's niece. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about asking me a hard question. I am, Stanford affiliated, but I couldn't be sort of more honored to take on this particular position at this time. I've been working on nuclear threats my entire career, and have had the, the privilege of working with people like Rose Gottemoeller, and some people in the audience I see, and I can't tell you that it's getting better. It is getting worse, and I didn't participate in the clock setting, but I completely agree that we're going in the wrong direction. What I took from the setting of the clock and moving forward a second towards midnight is that every second counts, that we don't have time to lose. And even at the press conference, I heard, sort of a reporter say, well, why do you do it like a clock? Why don't you just say like a percentage of like how close we are to, to complete annihilation? And I was like, the only percentage that you need to know is the chance isn't zero. So no matter what the mechanism that we're using, the message that we want people to take away from that announcement that happens every year, and the Doomsday Clock has become a very recognizable symbol of how close we are to dangers, is that it is getting worse. But on the positive side, there are things that you can do. And involving yourself in the conversation, being present, asking questions of your elected leaders, talking in your community about these threats. Those are all factors that can help change the direction of the clock. As far as where I am thinking about the future of the Bulletin is sort of how do we deal with all these complex threats that have become increasingly interconnected, and how do we get that information out to the public in a way that makes sense? How do we serve as a forum for this at a time when profit media has failed to adequately cover the complexity and the scope of these threats? So, relying on the expertise that we have on our various boards, pulling in the best thinkers from communities, from the nuclear space, emerging and disruptive technologies, bio, climate change, and making sure that we are giving a platform to people who are talking about these issues in an accessible way. In the nuclear space, we have to think about Russia. Yes, the president has indicated that he wants to talk to the Russians potentially about arms control and disarmament. At the same time, he said he's interested in pursuing, I believe he's now calling it a Golden Dome missile defense system. Well, that's sort of in contravention with the idea of arms control and reductions, because the interrelationship between offensive weapon systems and defensive weapon systems and how it affects strategic stability. I'm not sure the president has been fully briefed on the issues in wanting to go in those two trajectories. But that is exactly where the Bulletin can be having renewed conversations about the relationship between offense and defense, getting the broader public back into the conversation about why it is that we didn't pursue Star Wars back during the Reagan administration. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've got most people in this country now that don't remember the whole Star Wars debate. So how can we sort of reinvigorate the conversation about that with China? We've got to get them into an arms control discussion, but it's not the same arms control discussion we're having with the Russians. They've got a different size force. We have a different relationship. We've spent the last 60 years working with the Russians, still obviously, as is evident, not great at these nuclear conversations. We're going to have to get some time, patience, and expertise invested in the conversation with China as they continue to rapidly expand their nuclear arsenal. We're, again, running out of time. We've got to think about North Korea and Iran, proliferation threats that continue to sort of pull at the core of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is really the centerpiece of nuclear stability. We have to think about the fact that alliances that we've long depended on as the United States may in fact be fraying, and we may have given countries reason to perhaps doubt our commitment to these alliances. We have to think about how emerging and disruptive technologies are going to affect a nuclear strategic stability. And having been a government expert in some of these conversations, I can guarantee you we do not have the AI experts in the room while we are having really detailed conversations about regulating and controlling AI. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. We've got to get communities talking to each other. And again, I think the Bulletin is uniquely positioned to bring these voices together. On the issue of climate change, a lot of people are talking about civil nuclear technology as a bridging capacity to move away from fossil fuels. But what does that look like in terms of the proliferation risk of expanded civil nuclear technologies? That's a conversation that needs to happen. I think there's a good debate about how you would build proliferation-resistant technologies. How do you deal with the fact that conflicts may be increasingly climate change driven, conflicts over water, over arable land? These are the kinds of deep debates that need to happen, that need science, and that'll be all the more important in a world where we are now dealing with what is and isn't truth. Weaponized disinformation has become a problem in all these spaces. So again, finding places that you can get factual, well laid out arguments with good reference points from people who have good and respected backgrounds. That's the sort of thing I would like to see in the future. The Bulletin has a long history of being that place for the American public, for the global public. And I've long been sort of a harbinger of doom for my family and friends. And I'm very excited to now take that global and talk about all these existential risks with a far greater audience. But the more people that are in the audience, the more people that are aware of the threats, the more likely we are to find the kind of solutions that we need.
Excellent. Well, thank you very, very much. We have such a large audience, both here and online. By the way, I'd like to invite our online audience also to participate. Please put your questions into the Q&A function. I already have one pretty interesting question here, and I'm inviting the audience here also. Please raise your hand. We have a microphone available. Please wait for the microphone because we do have the webinar going on with an audience that is remote. So wait for the microphone and please introduce yourself. But as you're thinking about your questions, I wanted to do two things very quickly. First of all, to say that we do have some other key leadership figures in our audience today. They include Dr. Daniel Holtz, who is the chairman of the Science and Security Board. This is the board that Herbert is on. We also have David Relman here, who is tremendous expert on bio issues. He too is in the audience and on the Science and Security Board. Our great colleague Scott Sagan is on the Science and Security Board, but he, as many of you know, he is on sabbatical this particular quarter, so he's not here today. But in addition to the board members, we also have Dr. Sigrid Hecker, who's the chair of the board of sponsors. These are, well, I don't know what you call us exactly, Sig. We're kind of more eminence grise or something like that. I have the honor of being on the board of sponsors as well. So just wanted to note there's several other leadership figures and board members with us today. Now, also before I throw the floor open to questions, I wondered, Governor, you said something which it struck me as a successful politician with a long career. You said, "How do we get understanding from people you don't like?" Well, how do you go about that as a politician? How do you get understanding from people you don't like?
Very simple. If you want to get ahead, you got to make a deal. If somebody's got the votes and you need them, you got to get them. So it's not a business of whether, as I think the Godfather said, it's not personal. It's just business. And our business is survival. And we're not going to survive if we don't find a deep understanding with Putin and Xi and the rest of these. They're the principal ones. And as a matter of fact, they all have their own worldview. And people talk about strategic empathy, not to be kind of a warm, fuzzy feeling, but to put yourself in the minds of the other, which I don't find very much of. I think what has struck me very much, and I've been thinking about this, when I was up on that hill, Los Gatos, for 4 years, in silence, Latin and mortification, in a pre-Vatican II Jesuit seminary, we all believed, we had a clear, everyone believed the same thing. In fact, one of the rules of St. Ignatius is, let them all say the same thing according to the apostle. That was one of the rules of the order. And so there was a real deep unanimity of belief. Now, fast forward 60 years, I know a lot of these guys. The beliefs are very much scattered. Those beliefs that existed are in some minds, but in other minds are totally non-existent. So what I've noticed is there's belief is driving stuff. Putin, he either believes or says he believes that Ukraine is not a real country. People in Ukraine, oh yes, we are. We're a real country. Now they got to kill people over belief. And everywhere we're looking, and Taiwan is part of China. Well, we've already kind of acknowledged that. But these colliding beliefs have got to be juxtaposed to the facts. And the facts are human existence is under threat. And the threat of these powerful technologies that every year are getting more powerful. So the only way out is some kind of limited understanding that we all want to coexist. That was a term we heard a lot in the Cold War years. We need to find ways of coexisting, and we have something in common. Putin wants to live, I want to live. Trump, Biden, they all want to keep it going that they're a part of. And we're not going to keep it going unless we can control these weapons of mass destruction. It's that simple. But in order to get that topic out, you got to talk about it. And Biden, for several years, I think he talked to Putin once or twice. We talked to Xi more than that, but not enough. We've got to talk and talk. In fact, I kind of admire Rose here. Because in arms negotiations, I bet you talk a lot.
Yes,
in
you
a
do.
very boring conversation.
Day and night.
Day and night. Okay. Well, the big people, the presidents, they got to talk and they got to listen and they got to find that little piece of all the 100 things we hate and don't like. There's a few pieces that we're absolutely agreed upon. I know they exist, and we got to find those, emphasize them, and then work toward a modus vivendi. It can be done, but we got a lot of believers around here, a lot of believers, and they want to advance their belief. Well, yeah, that's I think we need some skeptics. We need some people who say, well, maybe we think it's this way, but other people see it another way. But we all know that destruction is not in our interest. And there's a lot of ways, whether it's bio threats or nuclear or even climate in the longer term. So that, but I guess it's so obvious. But I remember I went with Bill Perry and Sam Nunn, and we went to talk to the leaders of the Senate. I'm not going to tell you which level you know who they are. We talked to them about the danger of nuclear blunder. That conversation with Nunn and with Perry and the representative from the Senate lasted about a minute and a half and then devolved into other topics. The sustaining of focus on nuclear blunder is about 2 minutes. Then that's up. So we're facing distraction, disengagement on this issue because there's so many other things that are exciting and hot button. But we're never going to not have all that stuff. And you have to take an issue that's so abstract, like nuclear danger, and get it into our national, at least the leaders' conversation. And it's not there. I've been to, I don't know how many, dozens and dozens of fundraisers for congressional candidates. This is not a topic. What we're talking about today does not exist in most political circles most of the time. At least that's my experience. And we're going to change that. And the Bulletin is committed to waking people up to where we are. Not as a matter of doom, it's all over. No, it's not over yet. And it doesn't have to be over if we wake up.
Very good. Thank you, Governor, very, very much. I'm now ready to throw open the floor to your questions. And I already see Marty Hellman. Please, why don't you go first? Please wait for the microphone.
Could the nuclear threat become the nuclear opportunity if we'd actually treated as an opportunity in the sense of building the kind of world we've always wanted to build, the kind of world that you worked on up in Los Gatos?
Well, it should be. I mean, what's more important than preventing nuclear disaster or climate disruption of all species? I mean, it's so obvious, but the immediate, the novelty, the news of the day. That's one thing I noticed. News of the day. We tried to get climate. There was a time when the press would never talk about the climate. Then finally, actually, when Trump was elected the first time, they started pulling out of Paris. It became more newsworthy because it's conflict. And so it's an important, logically, what we're talking about, people should want to talk about it. Why not? And do something about it. But it's almost like we're cursed. That it's like the myth of Cassandra. She can foretell the future, but along with that, no one's going to listen. And we have to find a way to get people to listen, because what is being talked about right here is utterly reasonable, and I'm sure that Putin and his friends would agree if you could sit them down. Same with Xi. But there's so many other things, political pressures, your allies, there's just a bunch of stuff going on, and you got to crack through it. It takes persistence, takes creativity, and it takes a lot of luck.
Alex, you'd like to add a word?
Yeah, just two thoughts. One, I think the governor's right. Nobody wants these existential risks to sort of get away from us. And on the nuclear issue in particular, coming into the Biden administration, I saw that there were a lot of countries that were very on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So it's called the Nuclear Ban Treaty. The U.S. is not supportive, and I agree with that position. But I came with the frame of we share the same goal. This country, under the Biden administration and seemingly under this new administration as well, committed to the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. We share that goal with TPNW supporting countries. And I used a diplomatic strategy that I should patent that was called "Don't be a jerk," which was simply, going and talking with them and saying, okay, we have a process disagreement. It's a real process disagreement, but we don't have a goal disagreement. So what can we do together? And it was amazing how many things, doors were opening up by simply just sort of acknowledging we've got process, different approaches on how we want to deal with this problem, but we all agree of where we want to go, reduce and eventually eliminate nuclear threats. The second issue about patience and persistence, this is something I learned from Rose. This is hard work. This will take time. We're talking, months, years, decades that you dedicate to any one of these nuclear risk reduction efforts. We don't live in an environment anymore that's very friendly to patients. But on the China front, we had a meeting in November 2023. The U.S. and China, it wasn't seen as going very well, but there were three things the U.S. really wanted to talk about, which was launch notifications, AI, and space. Over the course of 2024, slowly but surely, we got progress on all of those things. The Chinese abstained on all the resolutions that the U.S. had put out to try to call attention to potential Russian emplacement of nuclear weapons in space. Russia lobbied China hard. China abstained on those. Two sets of progress on space. We wanted to talk to them about AI. By November of 24, President Xi and President Biden had a common statement about making sure that AI was not involved in the ultimate decision of whether or not to use a nuclear weapon, a statement that we and France and the UK had already made. We got China on board. The first launch notification we got from China in 40 years of a ballistic missile launch came in the fall of 24. Those were all small, tiny steps in progress, but it did represent some forward motion. But it's going to be slow. It won't necessarily be big ticket all the time. And if we're going to really, really deal with these threats, we're going to need some patience from our leaders, from our publics, from the media, to look at the small steps that can happen and eventually build to bigger things.
Very good. I'm going to take one question online, and then we'll come back to the audience again. Lieutenant Colonel Gonzalo Vergara, retired U.S. Air Force. He was a B-52 navigator, he writes here, and he said, I was on nuclear alert during one of those false alarms. It felt like I was dropped into a bucket of ice water. I can understand that. And Lieutenant Colonel Vergara asks, if Ukraine had not given up its nuclear weapons, would Russia have invaded Ukraine? The North Koreans obviously and clearly do not think so. It's a very good question. I get it asked all the time. but I'd be interested in the views of our panel. And Alex, do you want to start with that?
On the Ukraine one, I'll admit you're more the expert than I, Rose, but in my sort of estimation, it wasn't simply a matter of Ukraine keeping those nuclear weapons. I think had they made an attempt at the time, there probably would have been, sort of a different outcome. But Ukraine itself has repeatedly publicly said they made the right decision, that they stand behind their decision. And they've done this at multilateral fora many, many times. What I think the focus should be is not what Ukraine should or shouldn't have done. It's that Russia should not have invaded in the first place in 2014 and then again in 2021. And that's where the focus should be, Russia breaking its commitment to Ukraine, not whether or not Ukraine should have done something to prevent it. Russia shouldn't have done it in the first place. This conflict would be over right now if Russia just gets out of Ukraine. And that's where the conversation needs to be, not what Ukraine did wrong, but what Russia did wrong.
Very good. This gentleman here in the second row. And I do note that there are several of our fellows and also students in the audience. We do have a tradition here at CSAC of our fellows and students getting the floor as well. So if you've got a question, please let me know. Please alert me. Sir, go ahead. Please introduce yourself.
I use the microphone.
I'm a professor here, but it's not in that capacity that I want to say something. But as a citizen of Europe, and in particular citizen of my country, France, Governor Brown has rightly spoken, evoked human passions. They can be much more important than all the institutional arrangements that you can think of: envy, jealousy, hatred, humiliation, resentment, etc. I'm not sure, considering the American news that I listen to here, that you are aware of the hatred towards America that is developing among the peoples of Western Europe. The hatred mixed with fear and bewilderment at the sinister farce that is taking place in Washington. To be hectored and insulted by D.J. Vance, as Europe was in Munich among.
Sir, if I could ask you, we do want to have a conversation here. So if we'd be happy to talk during our reception about these very grave concerns. But if you have a question for our panel, very good.
Please don't play the D.J. Vance.
No, I'm
Please,
not. I'm
please
not trying to squelch
Okay,
speech,
please.
but I am hoping to have a question for our panel.
I have a question.
Very good.
But let me, this is very unpleasant, I must tell you. And that in the name of the gospel message. No, thank you. Too much is too much. We were allies of the US, then mere partners, then rivals, and now we are enemies. For someone like me who has always loved and admired the country, the situation is devastating. So I have a question to the panel and to the big people who are here. Why don't you stand up and prevent these guys from disseminating hatred, jealousy, envy? If not, this country is going to become the pariah of the world. Do you understand that? That's my question.
Thank you very much for that question. And I will say, as the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, former Deputy Secretary General of NATO, I feel the issues that you have raised here very strongly and on a personal basis. And if anyone on the panel would like to briefly comment, that would be welcome.
Well, I would say that Trump is putting out a lot of negativity. And the ricochet from that, who knows where it's going to end up. Very disquieting. And when you speak out and when you try to stop it, I mean, that it is a matter of tactics. He is dominating the media. He's got his whole party behind him. And it's a real dilemma. America's this flip-flop in the position of America, just a matter of weeks. It's very ominous. And how you combat it, it should be combated, but how, I think, takes real insight on how to do that. I mean, I've been in this political business a long time, and it definitely needs to be combated. And how and who and under what circumstances, that's the question. Where is it going? I think I think it's not gonna, I don't think this is the last word. I do think there will be shifts, and Trump is a very volatile character, and it's very hard to explain Vance in the Munich speech. It doesn't make any sense to me, but there it is. And I don't know. I think we're going to move beyond it. And I do think that people who don't like it should take action and speak in certain ways, but they're going to have to be effective. And that is not obvious to me as I sit here tonight, how to do that.
Go ahead, Alex.
I'll add it's not so much what are the four of us going to do, but what are all of us going to do in terms of reacting to the changes that we've seen, to the rhetoric that has been coming out of the White House. I know it's probably not a statistical analysis, but I did notice on my social media feeds, for what it's worth, and I come from rural Western North Carolina, not a lot of people usually talking about foreign policy issues. The day after the Zelensky meeting, I saw it all over my feeds. I saw people from my hometown who don't usually opine on foreign policy saying that they found it unacceptable. I take it upon myself in the role that I am, in the conversations I had, of talking more about why it is alliances make the United States stronger. And America first is synonymous with America alone. And that's a message that we need to work on together. But it's sort of everyone's responsibility as a citizen of this country and as a global citizen to sort of respond and react in civil discourse about what they do and don't want to see from their leaders. And if this moment in history is going to re-engage the American public in a deeper conversation about both these existential risks, but also how the United States is interacting with the rest of the world, then I would say that's probably a good thing and long overdue. American citizens have not paid as much attention to some of these issues as I think they should have. So I'm hoping that that is a positive effect, but I think it's something that we all have to be working on together.
Yep. Herb, do you want to add
Yes,
a word?
And the question of having an audience that's receptive to ideas, to good ideas, of course, we all face that problem, and many parts of this administration are not receptive to new ideas. On the other hand, there is value in trying to develop ideas now for a time when the politics of the situation may change. And when that time comes, it may happen very fast. And it would be better if we had those good ideas on the shelf and worked out, at least in some detail and thought through in some way, so that we can bring them when the time is right. And for myself, professionally, that's what I'm trying to do. The best I can do.
I was
just going to say, I don't think we were on the wrong track before. We had a nice alliance. Everything was okay, but it wasn't okay. The nuclear doomsday clock was ticking in the wrong direction. So Trump is coming along. He's breaking the dishes, breaking the alliances. He's reshuffling the deck. It might be that some possibilities actually emerge out of this situation. That's the way I interpret. That's the way I hope. Not for sure. We could be going in a worse direction, and it will keep going. But it's also possible that we broke the trend moving toward a possible inevitable conflict. Things I don't think we were so safe 3 months ago. So now it's all shaken. Europe and America are arguing, fighting. But out of all that, maybe we'll get a fresh look at where we are. Because it wasn't good before, and it's not good now. But I think it's more yeasty. I think it's a little more. There's a little more ferment going on, and I think
Knock things off square one.
Henry Adams, I just saw that in his education, in fact, on page 262, said that because I just read it last night, that chaos can sometimes be something that can be the opportunity of something good, whereas the habit kind of keeps you going in the same direction. So we're breaking our habits. What we're breaking them into is not clear, but it might be better. It might actually be better.
Yeah,
Is that even possible, Rose?
I feel the same. I always have in mind the old Chinese adage, in chaos there is opportunity. So Alex, last word
Just
on
a
this?
last point, I just wanted to foot stomp what Herb said about being ready when opportunities arise. And one thing that we were ready to do in the Biden administration at any given point, if Russia was ready to come back to the table to talk about strategic stability, we could have been on a plane with a full battle plan ready to go. And that's how we kept, sort of going, kept tearing through the problems as an interagency, and we're ready to go. And Herb's exactly right. There may be impediments to progress on some of these issues, particularly climate change, in the short term. But when there are opportunities to move forward, we need to have those ideas ready in place. We need to go. We need to not lose the time of trying to figure out what we want. We should know that now.
Yeah, I would say if you look back on climate, there was very little focus and attention in the media before Trump was elected and pulled out of Paris. That was a tremendous stimulus to focus on climate. And I was right in the middle of that, and I saw that. So Trump is unleashing a lot of disruption, but it's not just him pushing forward. It's going to be a reaction, and there are a lot of other forces in the country, from not only political but retired generals, retired foreign policy officers, people who care about medical research, people who care about universities. Many sacred cows are being attacked right now, and some of them, it's good to wake them up. But there's going to be a reaction. Now, the reaction could even be worse, because there's going to be a lot of turbulence. The turbulence we've seen to date is mostly coming from Trump, but it's going to come reaction, and the reaction might be creative, maybe destructive. We're living in very interesting times, but I don't think the verdict is in yet as for what America's policy toward Europe is going to be. I think that's just chapter one in a very dangerous and exciting saga.
I have a very good question online that continues this line of discussion, so I'm going to take that next, but I'm mindful there are some hands raised around the room. This question is from an anonymous attendee who says, Trump wants to reduce federal expenditures. Given that the nuclear enhancement modernization currently underway is estimated to cost $1.7 trillion, that is, could this present an opportunity for Trump to be persuaded to work for denuclearization, or at least not to add to the arsenal we already have? Alex, I know you've been thinking a lot about this. What do you think?
So this is one of the issues, the dichotomies I was talking about earlier, is you've heard the president say that he's interested in pursuing potential reductions, but at the same time, the process going on at the Pentagon about potentially cutting 8% of funding is supposed to fence off nuclear weapons modernization. So it's another instance of the two issues not connecting. What I think is important in the conversation going forward is not, do we fund modernization, do we not fund modernization, but how do we do it correctly? How do we do it to scale? How do we do it listening to experts, thinking through the various debates, and having those debates a little bit more publicly, a little bit more rigorously, and how do these steps in modernization affect our ability to pursue arms control with other countries? And sort of, if we're on the precipice of an arms race, three ways between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing, how do we take steps to move back a little bit, assess, and think, if we take these steps, is it actually going in response to perceived threats from the other? How does that play out? And that's a conversation that has been happening with too few people, a very small group of pretty insulated experts who don't necessarily like getting pesky questions. I know, because I've been one of those pesky questioners. It's not popular, but this has to be a larger debate. So I do think, as Governor Brown said, this is a disruptive period, but does this disruption actually open up some doors that hadn't been opened before? We'll see.
I hope so. Herb, you spent a lot of time in Washington. What do you think about this nuclear modernization question, and whether it should perhaps be looked at again?
Well, I mean, there are there are roughly 4 components of it. There's the modernizing the ICBMs, the submarines, the bomber force, and nuclear command and control. The thing that I say full speed ahead on and do as much as you can on is the nuclear command and control stuff.
Make it more reliable.
Make it more reliable, make it more robust, make it more better, more survivable. All those all those words, and that's really, really important. From my money, the most important part of it is making sure that the nuclear submarines stay viable. The current submarine class, the Ohio class, is sort of approaching its last legs. Maybe they can be extended again, and so on. I have real doubts about the Sentinel, the ICBM modernization. We're going to wind up in a situation, it looks like, where that program is going through many cost overruns. At this point, I think it's inflated by about a factor of 2 now over its initial costs. And we're going to extend the life of the Minutemen silo, the Minutemen, to do this. So, but we needed the Sentinel because we didn't want to extend the life of the Minute. So that doesn't quite make sense. And I confess I don't really understand the case for the crewed bomber anymore, but that's a different question.
The big elephant in the room here is money. The ICBM caucus in Congress represents people who want the money spent. So it doesn't matter what the ICBMs do, they do politically, and they're very politically protected in Congress, and money talks. I know I don't see anybody here who's run for office, but I've raised and spent $100 million. I can tell you money talks. We politicians really listen to money, and that money is playing a big role in the nuclear arms race. So we got to deal with that. But as a big picture, we got to pull back from the brink. So we don't want to manage this nuclear arms race. We want to pull back and create a fundamental basis where we're going to coexist together at a lower level of risk. And right now, we're not doing that.
I will just say on the Sentinel ICBM issue, I think no matter where you are on the scale of, should we, fully rebuild an ICBM force, should we not, the way Sentinel has gone is the wrong way. That we did have a debate about what to do, extend the life of Minutemen or go with Sentinel, and then chose Sentinel, but that program has been mismanaged. It wasn't well designed. There was a single source contract. There was lack of oversight from Congress. There was lack of oversight from the media. And so it's not even a matter of debate. Should we or should we not have ICBMs? The way we've gone about it is the wrong way. And again, that's why we need a more robust debate about what we're choosing for the future.
I do think there should be a debate on ICBM, but there can't be. They don't want to talk about it. And I've talked to generals who say we don't need it, but don't ask me to say that in public because you can't say it. A lot of this is politics. Now, a lot of experts around here, all the scientific, all that stuff. I know politics. And we politicians, we have our own ways. And we got to solve this thing politically as well. And we at least ought to have a debate on whether we need the ICBM or not. But besides all that, we need to start serious discussions with the Russians and with the Chinese. And I think Trump may do that. Trump's big deal is to keep his conservative base happy. Why is he doing all this stuff? Half the things he's doing, I don't believe he cares one bit about. He does care about being a very powerful president. For how long, I don't know. And the power, as he defines it, is going to come from having this MAGA base just be fanatical supporters. So he's giving them what they want. Now, part of that MAGA base is the Cato Institute. Well, they're not in the MAGA, but they're in Republican conservative. And they are skeptical of a lot of military spending. So you have Rand Paul is skeptical about military spending. So it's conceivable that Trump will cut back in some of the military spending. But the politics is going the other way. And we should have these technical debates that I find them very interesting. But I don't find many politicians I talk to are interested in what we're talking about. No. It's much simpler. I have to I want to give you one thing that I learned I never knew. I was elected governor of California. I had a bill, the farm labor bill, to create secret ballot elections for farm workers. And I was trying to get this guy's vote, and he was for the, and I said, well, can you vote on yes on this? He said, look, you got to talk to my jockey. I said, your jockey? Yeah, that's the Teamsters. If you get the Teamsters to say, okay, then you got my vote. So I didn't know that. They got jockeys. And if you don't go talk to them, you're not going to get the vote. So this is not about all your technical mishmash.
I had
This
no
is about-
idea the Teamsters and the jockeys had anything to do with each other, but it's
No,
fascinating.
well, they do, as a matter of fact, it's racist. But no, this guy was favorable. Every one of these people have groups that they favor. The ICBM caucus, their jockey is the ICBM industry. And they're from Wyoming and North Dakota and where's the other place? Where's the other?
South Dakota.
South Dakota. And so, that's our problem. We got to deal with all this technical stuff, and diplomatic is really crucial. But we got to talk about politics too.
Amen to that. By the way, though, President Trump does say he doesn't want to build one more nuclear weapon. And I think that's a positive message to have gotten out to begin with. I have a hand raised in the back row there. Actually, there are two. So we're running a little short of time. Why don't we ask both questions and then we'll in the back row. Yes, go ahead. Yep. Yes, you please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Ria, and I'm a Stanford student deeply interested in existential risk, especially with regard to nuclear weapons. As we usher in a rather symbolic change of 89 seconds to midnight, how can current officials and the future generation change the insulation or over-compartmentalization of critical conversations to create and stand by the urgency needed to ensure progress in the right direction can be made without engendering panic or fear-mongering that might reinforce the current situation? How might that be possible?
Okay, that's a good question for the public concern about these existential risks. The gentleman right there, if you would please go ahead. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm David Berkey. I'm a research fellow at the Hoover Institution.
Would you mind just standing up so we can hear you a little better? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm David Berkey. I'm a research fellow at the Hoover Institution. And my question has to do with Vladimir Putin's potential use of tactical nuclear weapons in this conflict with Ukraine, and how that enters into, if at all, your analysis, whether you find that destabilizing. Was that part of your last 10-second move forward from 100 seconds to 90 seconds, or do you find it simply bluster and consistent with remarks that have been made in the past?
Thank you. Thank you for those questions. They're actually linked because, getting the public, again, awake to these existential risks and threats, whether they are weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, or other kinds of existential threats and risks, is when you have a leader like Putin willing to rattle the nuclear saber, that does start to get the public wakened up. It was back in the fall of 2022, and our government at that time thought that there was a 50-50 chance that he might use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. I, for one, found that people started asking me nonstop about this. My dentist was asking me. I was going and getting my teeth cleaned, leaning over me saying, well, what about these nuclear threats? It's not, it was funny. I had to laugh at the time, but it was serious that finally the public was waking up and saying, wow, this could really happen. So we, experts think about this all the time, but I hate to say it, it's back to almost the breaking things that President Trump is doing now. It gets people focused and interested again on how to contend with existential threats. So how do you think about that, Governor?
Well, the problem is, you said it yourself, there was a 50% chance, at least in the minds of some American analysts, that Putin would resort to nuclear weapons. So you might put it, if I could frame it this way, if Ukraine starts winning, then it starts losing if Putin resorts to nuclear weapons. And so where's the dilemma? If you win, you lose. If you lose, you lose. So the only way out of it is something different. and we're headed to something different. I don't know what the hell it is, but we were in a pretty locked situation. Putin started winning, so the threat of nuclear weapons went down. But winning is bad, rather for him winning. But if he's losing and he's making more likely he's going to use nuclear weapons, that's bad. Because if he did, then what do? We're going to do something. It's not going to make it better. And so then we're off to the potential escalation. So the only answer is we need something very different. We're getting that very different. And who knows? It might even be better.
Right.
The-
Alex, go ahead.
So, almost from the start, just, sort of, I think it was weeks into the invasion, Putin started to raise the nuclear specter, in some ways, sort of undermining the deterrent effect because there wasn't a commensurate change in any way the Russians were posturing their forces. And we consistently saw that. And we're talking about it quite publicly, that we kept hearing these things, but watching very closely, hadn't seen any modifications in sort of Russian behaviors, particularly their strategic forces and how those were positioned. Things did come to a head because I think there was a thought in the Kremlin that this is a way to sort of move forward, and sort of that red line was crossed, and they looked for different ways, pulled back on some of the last conversations we were having in a multilateral sense when we provided ATACMS to Ukraine. So they keep looking for ways to tie their conventional invasion to the nuclear threat in sort of hopes, I think, of changing our behavior. What the long-term consequences of that on sort of deterrence theory, it remains to be seen. But in terms of how you bring the public into this conversation without scaring the bejesus out of them and making them feel like there's nothing to be done, so why even participate in this discussion, because there's no way I can change it. I think it's sort of a pivot. Rose is particularly good at this, is to talk about the threat, but then to move to the solutions, sort of pushing leaders to get back to the table, to start talking, to reject the idea that we're going to missile our way out of all our problems. And I think accepting the fact that, to quote or to reference another Greek myth, the governor talked about Cassandra, I always think about Sisyphus, and sort of all this work that we've been doing seems Sisyphean. We keep pushing the rock up the hill, but if we stop, that rock is going to roll right over us. We don't have a choice. We've got to keep looking for ways to manage these problems, and that's why I've always been eager in getting the broadest possible interdisciplinary group of experts thinking through this. We need lawyers, we need scientists, we need politicians, we need nuclear experts, we need military experts, we need the media, involved in this conversation. And all the good ideas aren't going to come out of Washington, Moscow, London, France, and Beijing. We need everyone participating in this conversation. That's not some sort of trope about diversity. We actually need a much broader set of people working through these problems, and it's our interest to have a larger base of people. And the solutions are out there. We went from 70,000 nuclear weapons in the world, which is a ludicrous number of nuclear weapons, to a simply incredibly dangerous number of nuclear weapons now. And we've gotten to the hard part, that the decisions that come from here on out at this, basically we're at a reckoning right now. We've brought numbers down, we've been on a plateau, and right now these decisions are going to affect whether we go up again, and bring on all these, these threats, and the luck that we've had may in fact run out, or we're going to keep finding ways to pull that number down. But we won't do it unless we've got a much broader set of people working the problem, and publics that feel that this is a threat that exists, but it's a threat that we can manage collectively.
So just for reference, the Federation of American Scientists, the number is 11,000 or 12,000. I always kind of.
I'm having a hard time with like official government number and like publicly reported number.
Check out the website of the Federation of American Scientists. They're the best, I would say, non-governmental source, but it's down from 70,000 down to 11,000. I mean, that's still a large, very large number, but the numbers have come down significantly since the height of the Cold War.
Those notebooks are also published in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, so you can get it there.
Very much.
And now, look, that's good. We're down to 11,000. I thought it was a little higher, but some studies have said, and they're not perfect, that 100 nuclear weapons could generate something, the soot and the depression of food production, some kind of nuclear winter. Now, nuclear winter has been challenged, but it seems to me the current understanding is it's not certain, but it's not certain that it won't happen, that there's risk there. There's risk of mutual, there's risk of mutual annihilation anyway, but at a certain level below annihilation, you could have this utter disruption of the weather, the climate for years to come. So it seems to me that if this UN group starts studying the consequences, which the UN didn't want them to study and Russia didn't, but China did, so that was good, that I think studying the consequences can wake people up. And we got, right now, I think it's too cavalier that we can manage our way through all this. I think we need a much more radical shift in some way that's at the same time as practical. I think that studying the consequences again gets people to that. It might get Putin's attention. Might get. I think it's got Trump's attention.
It
I think
has.
he does have that sense.
He does. Herb, would you like to have a word on this?
No, this is-
All right, very good. Before we leave this point, I just want to note that Maxwell Patterson, who's a student at the Monterey Center for International Security Studies, also asked the very same question. So I want to give Max, another younger scholar, student, some credit here as well. All right, we have a few minutes left, and I saw a few more hands. There's one over here in the corner who's been very eager to ask a question, and you, sir, we'll give you these two last questions, and then we'll
I'm John
wrap it up.
Fox from Applied Physics. I have a question about the role of science advising. Historically, go back 70 years, there's been a very strong input from the academic and civilian scientific community advising through PCAST, many boards. I'm curious what this group thinks the role for science advising is looking to the near future.
Excellent question. Thank you for that. And this gentleman right here on the aisle, one last question. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Bogdan. I am CNS fellow at Middlebury Institute for International Studies. And I actually have the...
Stand up, please, just to make it a little easier to hear. Thank you.
And speak a little slowly. I'm having a hard time following.
Okay. Trump administration pauses all the military aid to Ukraine, and it can be the part of efforts of detaching Russia from China. And I'm just curious, do you think these policy efforts will be successful? And what is the China reaction can be? Can they use this momentum, for example, for expansion in Taiwan? Thank you very much.
Yes, that's an excellent question. That's deserving of a whole nother seminar in its own right, but we'll take the next 6 minutes to wrap up, and I'll say for our panel, these are our perhaps last opportunities to land some points. So I'll ask you to be thinking in those terms. And Herb, I'll start with you. Go ahead.
Let me take the one about science advice, which is that the interesting thing about science is that if you try to do something that violates the laws of physics, you probably won't be able to do it. And
one hopes.
Well, I'm reasonably confident of that statement. But that doesn't prevent people from trying to violate the laws of physics. But they'll eventually get there. And it is true that the administration seems to be trying to cut ties to reliable scientific advice, wanting scientific, yes men to come advise it. On the other hand, there are people who understand that that reality matters. Also, even in this administration. I can tell you that I've been in touch with a variety of them who have called me up and asked for, what do we do about X, Y, or Z technology? Is there a science issue, and so on? And they behind the scenes, there is a statement of, well, don't let anybody know I talked to you. But so there's still some reasonable people there that at least understand the value of scientific input. Then there was the other. I don't have a question. Comment on the other.
Right.
China and Russia.
China and Russia. If you want to add anything on that, or we'll
No,
move
you
on?
should. Somebody else should take that one.
All right, very good. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I'll take the science advising first. It's absolutely essential. Every major arms control and non-proliferation agreement, other risk reduction agreements have had scientists at the core of helping problem solving. I know one of my close colleagues who is the director for multilateral and nuclear affairs, is a theoretical physicist. He was one of the best diplomats I knew, I think because he was a physicist and because his brain would problem solve in ways that sort of, social scientists may not have had that kind of training. And it was amazing to watch him.
Or diplomats for that matter.
Or diplomats, yeah, work through problems from a science perspective. And, I can't tell you enough how much I'm already gaining in this new position from the scientists that we have on our various boards and how much they're bringing to the conversation. So I can't say enough good things, but as I was saying before, we need scientists, we need lawyers, we need sociologists. Everybody needs to be a part of this conversation. China, Russia, I like to use the term frenemy, which is an idea of a friend enemy combo, and sort of they are friends of convenience. They've got goals that make them go in the same direction. But I think, as you've seen throughout this war, there are times where China wanted to distance itself, and the nuclear issue is one of them. China very clearly, pushing against any possible use of nuclear weapons. Also, China very clearly being on the record that they think Russia made a mistake in illegally suspending implementation of the New START treaty, very publicly calls for the US and Russia to return to the negotiating table. Of course, they also use it as an excuse of why they don't have to come to the negotiating table, which I like to remind them. There's no asterisks in Article 6 of the NPT that says China can get around to good faith disarmament when it feels like it. They have the same obligations that we do, but they find times to separate. And I think what we should be focused on is mainly how do we try to get on these existential risks, Russia and China and us and other countries moving in the same direction? Where are those common benefits for working together? I think emerging and disruptive technologies is a place for that. I think particularly because it's not loaded down in decades worth of sort of politics between these countries. And I think all the countries that we've been talking about see an interest in trying to put some norms and behaviors around emerging and disruptive technologies. So maybe we could do some work there, and that will open up doors in the nuclear space in the future. And I'll just add one last thing in terms of, how do we get the public involved? I would say, this is one of the ways. You guys are in here on a lovely Monday afternoon listening about ways the world could end. But I think just being here, being present for a conversation, talking with people, reading the Bulletin and other publications, the great products that CSAC puts out, that's part of it, is just simply being in the room for it.
Thank you, Alex. Governor, you have the opportunity to wrap us up.
Well, I'd like to end on a more hopeful note, but I don't know that I can. Yes, Trump is shuffling the deck. Yes, he's expressed some concern about nuclear weapons. But with respect to the question about science, this is the guy that totally denies climate, is doing everything he can to destroy the wind industry. They're preparing to completely dismantle California's climate initiatives, pulling out of the World Health Organization. So science doesn't seem to be playing any role here. And that's very dangerous. And the other thing that I think we haven't talked about it, but with Trump being willing to prevaricate, to say whatever he wants, regardless of the truth, that's very dangerous. The role of lying, it's unprecedented. Secondly, the vilification of people, the vilification of immigrants, illegal though they may be. It's such a hatred. It raises real questions when you dehumanize and you promote deception and lies. So we shouldn't take this as just business as usual. we're in a deep, deep danger here, and we'll have to do the best we can. But and then Trump, when he wants to build his golden dome, that's going to completely stimulate a nuclear arms race in itself. So anyway, what I would say is, but we don't know. I asked Bill Perry, what makes you optimistic? And he said, the future is uncertain. That's all I can say.
This is true, and that is actually an excellent note on which to end our excellent panel discussion today. Please join me in thanking our panelists. The future is uncertain, but our immediate future is sure, and that is we have a reception going on outside. I hope you will join us for the next hour and have some more chance for conversation. I also want to thank our online audience. We had quite a few people online, so we had an opportunity for a really good discussion also across the country. Thank you again for being here, and as I said, please join us.